All right, so we'll go on holding by the book of Leviticus chapter 18. Again, we're going holding by the book of Leviticus chapter 18. We're still on verse 2. Probably be there for a little bit. Again, we're going holding by the book of Leviticus chapter 18. Torah says, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, God spoke to the Jewish people saying, Daber b'nei Yisrael v'amarta lehem ani Hashem Elokeichem. That speak to the children of Israel, say unto them, I am the eternal, your God. Rashi over here said, as we mentioned before, the God spoke on Mount Sinai, right? Kingship you took, kingship you accepted, right? So Rashi says, therefore accept my decrees. Says Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, Rabbi Judah the prince, organized the Mishnah. He says that it was known to God in the days of Ezra, they would ultimately revolt against restricting sexual relations. He therefore said, and that's what the whole chapter is all about, and he said to them with a decree emphasized by the words, I am the Lord your God, understand well who imposes decrees upon you. Right, and God is the judge, right? His function is to punish and to give reward. So we spoke quite a bit about that, and we're in the middle of this Or Chaim HaKadosh, and the Or Chaim HaKadosh in the great commentaries more than 100 years ago. We're speaking about this idea that God gave us the ability to overcome desire, right? As the Gemara says, God created the evil inclination. He created the antidote. What's the antidote? The antidote is Torah. But as the Gemara says, you still need God to help you to overcome it. So he gives you the ability. He gives you the ability to overcome it. Right? He gives you the ability to overcome it. And then he says that what are we talking about over here? That really according to nature, person is forced to deal with evil inclination. It's almost like you're under onus, right? Onus means that it's beyond your control, right? 100%, right? It's beyond your control. So you're never punished for something that is beyond your control. Nonetheless, still gotta try and fight against it. But what does God want? He wants you to fight against it, right? Says the Or Chaim HaKadosh. He wants you to guard yourself against it, because even though we have an evil inclination, what does God say? You're able to withstand it. You're able to fight against it. The only way to do it is with Torah, which we mentioned many times. So he says that we shouldn't come to be tested, right? That's what we pray every day. That we shouldn't have tests. On the other hand, if you're not tested spiritually, you don't grow, right? It's kind of a catch-22. But he says, let's say a person transgressed over here. They transgressed according to nature. Yeah, what happens? Person gave into the evil inclination. So he says, if person transgressed over what we mentioned, right, according to his nature, a person does not have the power, right? We're gonna have to explain this. A person doesn't have the power, so to speak, to prevent himself these desires. Now, and that is what it means over here, that he says the ways of God are pleasant. And the Torah says, the next verse, we'll get there. I'm not sure when, but we'll get there. That it says, don't go after the ways of the people of Egypt, where you dwell. Now, what does that mean? He says it means you dwelt there in a place where totally immoral, right? One of the most immoral places that exists. or existed. So he says, how is it going to be if it's such an immoral place? How are you going to guard yourself against it? Right? God put us there. How are you going to guard yourself against it? He said, you're not prevented. The fact that you were there and you live there, right? You dwell there. He says, how are you going to prevent? You're not able to prevent yourself from these thoughts. Why not? Because you're steeped in a place that's steeped in immorality. So to be able to fight it, really to be able to fight it, it's going to be very hard. So you can ask, why did God put you there? Very good, right? But you're put in such a situation. It seems impossible to fight against. So he's saying he says you're prevented from it disappearing, right? So it's there. So you have to deal with it. You certainly have to deal with it. And he says that it's very strong. This inclination is very, very strong. Even so, says God himself, I command you, the Jewish people, I command you to not go in their ways. Now, this seems like an impossibility. We always believe, right? We always believe that a person is never put in a position to fail, right? We may think we're not going to succeed. We may think it's only a question how far I fall. Nonetheless, we're put in a position that even if we think it's very hard, even if we think it's impossible, nonetheless, it doesn't mean that we can't overcome it. But he says over here, right? Let's go back here. He says over here that according to nature, person transgressed over here. Person transgressed according to nature. So he says a person is not able, doesn't say impossible, but he says in general, a person is not able to prevent themselves from this desire, this forced desire. Now, why does it say it's forced? Because you're in a place that's totally immoral, right? If you're in a place that's totally immoral, doesn't that mean, by definition, you probably will be immoral also? So you'll say, what do you mean? I got free choice. I have free choice. Who says I have to be like everybody else, right? I have to be like the least common denominator. And I have to go in those ways. But if the power is so strong, then he says, according to nature, you fall in the trap. Right? Now, what would we say on that? It's a big catch-22. Because if you're going to say God put us there, and the only thing that saved us from coming out of Egypt was we didn't change our clothing, we didn't change our language or our names. Yeah, but they almost fell into the 49th level of impurity, which they would have disappeared spiritually. So again, you could ask the question, why God put them in such a situation? Okay. But he says, according to nature, you're forced into this. Your nature is forced into this. You can't prevent it. In other words, you live in a place. You can't go live in a cave. You can't live in a desert somewhere, not affected by it. You're stuck in this place. Bottom line, you're stuck in this place, and this place has tremendously negative influence, right? Tremendously negative influence. So, we can say, for lack of a better term, that's what exile is. Everywhere. Because you're steeped in it. You live in a consumer society, right? You live in a consumer society. Now, even though that's true, who says you have to get sucked into it? So you say, I'm going to live in a religious neighborhood. right? An Orthodox neighborhood, very good, a very strong Orthodox neighborhood. Okay. Whether it's New York, New Jersey, wherever it is. And you're going to be more insolent. Okay. Could also be true. You know what? It also seeps in. It also seeps in. People go to the outlets. People want to save money. There are sales. You go into stores. Yeah. Stores, secular stores. You go to malls, right? They still have malls, I'm sure. They have malls. You go to these places, you're affected by what you see. 100%. You're affected by, a person, so you say, well, a guy won't go there. His wife will go, right? She'll go get things, whatever. He doesn't have to go see whatever's there. Okay. Even with that, but what do people talk about? I'm not going to, malign the religious world. Certainly not. I lived in one of the strongest, Jewish communities when I was in America, in New Jersey. But nonetheless, what happens? Well, they have more money, less money, doesn't really matter. Society seeps it. More, certainly more than Israel. Now, someone once told me if people in Israel made more money, they'd be just as gashmias, they would be just as, spend more money and build bigger houses and this and that if they had the ability. I said, I hope that wouldn't be true. I hope some people would still have ideals. But the problem is, you make a lot of money. Forget the fact that, it's going to cost a lot to send your kids to school, and food and everything else. That's where all your money goes, pretty much, to a car, 2 cars, insurance, rent, or a mortgage, tuition. That's it. That's where your money goes. Right. So when I was in New Jersey, they say if you're not making $100,000, you're in debt. Not just like you're breaking even. Yeah. So that was already more than 20 years ago. Yeah. So if someone's really making it, very good. What's the problem though? You have everything. It's kashrus. You have yeshivas. You have girls' schools. You have everything. Okay. But what did I notice? I mean, it wasn't shocking to me to a certain extent. I never lived in in a religious community in America. It's the first time I was there 3 years, 3.5 years. But what struck me as a very, very strong learning community. I mean, a lot of people worked. It wasn't like everyone sitting and learning, but full time. Okay. But what struck me, which again wasn't shocking, because America is America. But what did I see? So I saw people that, not all people, but there were people sucked into America. Sales, other things. They looked religious, they prayed, they learned, whatever. But a lot of the conversations were not in learning. What were the conversations in? What's going on with this? What's going on with that? News, sports, sometimes other things. You just get caught up in it. Why? Because everyone's caught up in it. No matter you're religious or not religious, people get caught up in it. Especially, clothing and other things. Again, I'm not saying people are spending, thousands of dollars on rich clothing and dressing up their kids and this, that. Some people are. Yeah, I wouldn't say most people, per se, but okay. So you're going to find bargains. You're going to find, you'll go to different places because that's what you can afford. Okay. But the whole mentality, I mean, to me was shocking in different ways. I mean, I shouldn't have been. But to hear people talk, I could have been talking to secular people. Wouldn't have been any different in certain ways. I'm saying not across the board. But, someone said when I was there, at least when I was first there, someone said, don't worry. You speak real strong. You came from Israel. Very good. hung out with, these great rabbis and this and New Orleans, whatever. You come to America, you're in America now. Soon enough, you'll be like everybody else. So I said, if that happens, I'll be in the first plane out. I was like, I kept saying my deals where I was there, where I was here. That didn't change. But what was the comment? What was the comment about? Come on, you come. Listen, it's a religious place. A lot of religious people. You got a lot of good things going on. That's true. That's true. But what would Kaufman say? Kaufman would say, where's the heart? Where's your heart? Where are you holding in the world? Yeah, learning's good. Doing other things is good. But you have God in your life. And this I saw. People can make blessings every day, thousands of blessings a year, whatever it is, and have no connection to God whatsoever. In the best of places. People are going to say, wow, that's shocking. Again, I'm not saying by everybody, by any stretch. Yeah. There are people that are growing, that are striving, in spiritual terms. What's the problem? You live in a secular society. Doesn't matter how entrenched you are in your own neighborhood. It's still a secular society. And you're affected by it. Some more, some less. It's very easy. Very, very easy to get affected. I'm going to say it's impossible not to be affected. Yeah, I'm not going to go that far. But very powerful, what goes on there. So here the Or Chaim HaKadosh says, according to nature, they were in Egypt against their will. Against their will. And he says a person cannot have power and prevent this thing that is forced on them, i.e. society. And everything that comes with secular society. Right? In this case, what's worse? Immorality. That is the worst thing. Yeah. So that, also plays a role. Very good. But you're forced. So what could we easily say? What could we easily say? We could easily say that even though you're forced, why do you get punished? There should be no punishment. Why should there be no punishment? Because you have no choice. You're stuck in that environment. So if you're stuck in that environment, what would you say to God? You're going to say, you're going to punish me? Like, seriously? Because I did this, that, and the other thing? You're right. I agree. It's wrong. Right? At least you admit, let's say you admit it's wrong. Okay. But you're going to say, I'm stuck in that environment. What do you want? What do you want from me? Everyone's busy, buying things, going to sales, this and that. They get caught up in everything. In the fakeness of it. I couldn't stand walking in the stores and, people would say, people would say how fake it is. They would say, hi, can I help you? I was like, you want to make money, right? You don't care if I drop dead right now. Are you going to care? Like, I'd love to say that. Like, shock people. They're like, oh, I call the police. We call an ambulance. What do you mean? Of course we care. What do you care about? It says in the American dollar, in God we trust. That's what you care about. You want your store to make money. Yeah. So, you got people that obviously are going to come out and say, how are you? Can I help you? They want to make money. They want to make a sale. But deep down, that's all it is. They see you as a customer. Someone who's going to pay. That's all they see. Say, come on. Don't you know how business works? Right? Isn't that how it works? Like, here in Israel, you walk into a store, they're like, what are you doing here? I mean, it's gotten better. Customer service has gotten better. Well, you can walk in the store, it's like, you're taking up space here. I was like, do you want to make a sale? It's like, do you actually want to sell something? Or you just want to be obnoxious? Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's really our learning, about customer service, but like, I'm doing you a favor. I might actually spend money in your store. Oh, make it quick. I got other things to do. Uh, you know, so customer service is worth something. It's true. Yeah, someone walks in the door as a potential customer. Very good. So you have to serve them. Okay. And you wanted to buy something or whatever your business is, whatever you do. Okay. Yeah, so I get it. But when someone walks in the door, it's like, hi, can I help you? It's like the kiss of death for me. I'm like, really? You want to help me? I was like, you want to know what's going on in my life? Well, I can use a therapist right now. Like, you really want to help me? Come on, you're going to think you're taking it too far. I walked into a store many, many years ago. One of my trips every year and a half went to the States. So I walk in the store, and three guys come up, and more help, I guess. Then they were bored, I guess. But they're like, can we help you? So I was like, sure. Well, I need some batteries, and I need this, and I need that. It's like, so they're like, I'm Fred, I'm Bob, Jim. I'm like, Fred, Bob, Jim. It's very funny. Yeah, I'm like, oh, batteries, aisle one. Because some guy takes me to aisle one, some takes me over here. Then takes my wife somewhere else. Like, it's beautiful. Like, you're being taken care of. I don't like look like an invalid or something. Like, okay, you know, they want to take care of me. Very good. Their goal is to get people the things they need. Right? You get it straight away before people flake out. They want to buy something unless the price is too high. Okay, I get it. Right? That's for business. And that's what they want. But they put on that smile, can I help you? I'm like, come on, doesn't anyone ever really want to say, you want to help me? You want to know what I'm going through right now? Like, okay, let's sit down in the corner. I'll tell you what I'm going through. They're like, whoa, like, I want to deal with this. I just asked you if you wanted help. That has to be a therapist, right? I mean, try that, see what happens. Guaranteed. Guaranteed they're going to think you're off your rocker. You just stop them dead in their tracks. you know, you know, hi, can I help you? You really want to help me? Really? I can, just imagine the face on the other person. They're like, oh, you're a wacko. You know, I just asked if you needed help. I asked to be a therapist. Okay. Yeah, okay, I'm taking this, a little too far. But this is what society is. Now, again, you want to sell something, you have to have good customer service. You have to speak well. Not necessarily, I mean, there are people that, barely speak English. They get the point across, get people to write things for them. They make money. Okay. Right. But again, if you're selling things, right, you keep, you're selling things. I get it. You want to draw people in. Okay. But isn't it very easy to get sucked up in this society? To get sucked up in the mentality? And to buy things you don't even need. Please say, yeah, I wish I was in that position. I'm so poor. Okay. But I'm saying, but you're bombarded by things. You're totally bombarded by things all the time. So, says first thing the Or Chaim HaKadosh here says is that according to nature, it's against your nature. Totally against your nature. You're forced in. So you're forced to suck in whatever society throws at you. So you're going to be like Moshe Rabbeinu, not to be affected by it, to be totally insular. So then he says you're forced into it. You don't have a choice. You can't prevent it. This is what it means that the ways of the living God are nice. Really? Because we always say, right? We always say, Divrei Elokim Chaim. What does that mean? These are the words of the living God. You can have a difference of opinion. One rabbi says like this, this other rabbi says like that. These are the words of the living God. Very good. And the ways of God are pleasant. Okay. Now, when we look at things in general, and we don't deserve anything, right? Forget about the hoods. You don't deserve a hoodie if you learn a lot of Torah. You know why? Because that's what you're created for. So why does God give you rewards? Says the Chovos HaLevavos. Chovos HaLevavos says, dude, is the heart. Why do you get rewards? For what you do, that's what you created to do, the Mishnah Perkei Avos. You heard a lot of Torah, don't think you're so great, don't be gaivadik, don't be conceited. Because that's what you created to do. Beautiful. So why do you get the hoodsie? Why do you get the hoodsie? Why do you get rewards? Says the Chofetz is a mind-boggling thing. Every time I think about it, it's mind-boggling. You don't deserve reward. That's what you're told to do. You want to be a Jew? You're obligated in all these things. You don't want to be a Jew? You're still obligated in certain things. Okay. You want reward? Don't be a pig. Why do you want reward? You're obligated to keep what God says. As a Jew or a non-Jew, period. That's what you got to do. You don't want to eat all the matzah? On Passover? God's going to say, shut up and eat the matzah. I don't care. Eat it. No wonder if it makes your stomach, upset. You can eat the matzah. Okay. The rest of the days, you don't have to. Except on Shabbos or the last day of the festival. Fine. But on that night, 2 nights, you got to eat a lot of matzah. Good. So you got to do what he said. You got to do what the king said. Okay. But I want reward for doing it. Imagine. I'm in a weird mood today. Imagine, right, put on my funny George Burns glasses. I'll put on my funny mustache. I'll play God. Yeah. I gave you all these commands, right? I'm playing God here. I gave you all these commands. I told you what to do. Left, right, and center. I told you what to do. You say, fine. We'll accept it. No problem. Not seven ishma. We'll accept whatever you say. We don't care what it is. We'll accept it. Good. Idiots. Good. You accept it. Beautiful. Yeah. But then they say, then your creation, my creation, if I'm playing God here, my creation says, but I want a hood. I'm only going to keep what you tell me only if you give me a reward. Only if I give you a reward. The world is 70% water. You're never going to have a problem with water. Plenty of food, right? You have a desire to eat food, take care of the body, all these things. All these miracles I do for you, the human body, right? The way the sun is, the moon, the stars, the planets, the universe. And you're telling me I'm going to keep what you say because you're making a condition. So if I were God, I'd say, forget your condition. You got to do what I say. Forget condition. Yeah. So God says, you know what? I feel bad. I feel bad over here for you. I'll give you a reward. I'll give you the hoodsie. Even though you don't deserve it. You don't deserve it. So if you don't deserve it, why should I give it? Because that's what you're created to do anyway. Very good. So what does the Chofetz say? Mind-boggling thing. You know why? You know why he does it? Why God gives reward? He gives reward because God's about chesed. Because God does acts of loving kindness. That's the reason. Does he have to give reward? No. He takes care of your needs. What do you think? He needs to take more of it? Whatever, it doesn't matter. Takes care of your needs. Takes care of your body. Yeah? Gives you food to eat. You're not starving, living on the street. Million and a half things to be thankful for. Very good. And you also want reward? God says, fine. I'll give you rewards. Why will I give you rewards? It's a chesed. It's an act of loving kindness. Do I have to? I don't have to. Certainly not. That's what I created you for. I created you to serve me. Oh, but there's one caveat. There's one caveat. What's the caveat? Caveat is I got free choice. Animals don't have free choice. Right? Someone that points out, we mentioned before, but Eliopian said, we have the ability to go against our nature. Animals don't. Animals are programmed. Right? Programmed DNA. Plants, trees, planets, they're all programmed. So they can't do whatever they want. Only man can. Man has the ability to go against their nature. Very good. And the only way to do it is with Torah. Okay. Right? Spoken about that. But he says over here, you're being forced into this. You are in a place that is tremendously immoral. And who put us there? God did. Right? Punishment, after Abraham says, I want to understand your ways or whatever. And God says, you're a nation. It's going to come out of you. It's going to be, a nation not theirs. They're going to get enslaved. They're going to have all kinds of problems. I'm going to judge them, judge the nation that does it. Very good. Yeah. So they're put in that situation, right? And these are pleasant ways of the living God. Pleasant? The Jewish people almost got obliterated spiritually, right? Had they hit the next level, there'd be nothing left of the Jewish people. Nothing. But the ways of God are pleasant, because he says that what's the next verse? The next verse in verse 3, which we're not going to get to now, but it says, do not go according to the ways of the Egyptians, where you dwelt, Eretz Canaan, and the ways of the Canaanites. Asher ani mevi eschem sham, I brought you there. Right? Don't go in their ways. Do not go in their ways. Says Or Chaim HaKadosh over here, and he said, don't go in the ways of the Egyptians, that you dwelt there. What does that mean? He said you dwelt in a place where these people are totally immoral, right? Nonetheless, he said it still didn't prevent you from being in control, even though you dwelt among them, because I commanded you, right? You were stuck there. You had no choice. But I commanded you, even so. He says that's going to be very, very hard to control yourself, because you're going to be in such a bad situation. But I put you there, even though that's true. I still command you that not to go in their ways. Right? So you have to prevent yourself from going in their way. Now, this is a major catch-22. On the one hand, God placed us there. On the other hand, God knew if we would have stayed there much longer, we would have disappeared spiritually. Took us out earlier. Right? Took us out after 210 years. Supposed to be there for 400 years. Jewish people never would have survived. Major catch-22. If he put us in there, and he knew why he was putting us in there, and he knew that was going to happen, why do it? Why do it? There are other ways he could have done it. They had to be enslaved. Now, why do they have to be enslaved? Why do they have to be enslaved? They have to be enslaved. One reason, could be many reasons. One reason, Moshe Rabbeinu grows up in the palace of the king. Right? The king made a decree, he finds any male child, to kill him, throw him in the river. But he saw through his what do you call them? He had servants that were able to understand the stars. Right? So they understood that a baby is going to come from the water and it's going to destroy Egypt. Lo and behold, his daughter, Batya or Bitya, however she's called, saved Moshe Rabbeinu. Knew he was a Jewish child. Obviously kept this from the king somehow. Right? But Moshe Rabbeinu grows up in the palace of the king. Now, very ironic. Right? The one he wants to destroy, that's going to destroy him, let's say, and his whole nation, is growing up in his house. It's growing up in the palace. That's also ironic. So what's going on? So one possible reason is Moshe Rabbeinu had to see what kingship was. He had to understand what kingship was in this world. Why? He had to see a flesh and blood king in order to know what it means to serve the King of Kings. In other words, flesh and blood king, how much power does he have? As much power as God wants to give him. But he himself thought he was God. So Moshe Rabbeinu, after he flees and he comes back, God says, go meet him at the river, side of the river, and tell him to let the Jewish people go. Now, why did he go to the river? Why did God tell him to meet him there? Because if you're a king, Sorry, if you're God, you have no bodily needs. Now, if he declared himself to be God himself, as if like he created himself and created the world, okay, big egomaniac or egomaniac, depending on how you say it here, right? Big egomaniac, but he can't take care of his own function, his own bodily function. So what does he do? We'll keep this clean. He goes to the river to relieve himself. Otherwise, body going to explode. Very good. So Moshe Rabbeinu comes and he says, "Oh, Paro, how you doing?" He catches him in the act, yeah. Knock him down a few pegs here, right? And he says, "I want you to let my people go." He says, "Who's your God? Which I listen to? This, that, okay." But he had to understand what a king was. He had to understand what kingship is in order to understand who the King of Kings is. Very good. So the Jewish people have a big problem here. Major, major problem. And that is they're gonna be enslaved and they're gonna be stuck in a country that is totally immoral. It's absolutely immoral. The best of people will not be able to survive. Spiritual. Now, God takes them out early. Takes them out after 210 years because they would have reached that point of spiritual oblivion. Even though, they didn't change their clothes or they didn't, change their names, it kept Rosh Chodesh, New Month, whatever it was. Nonetheless, they deserved to be obliterated. God says, I can't do that because I don't want to have a Jewish people. I want to have my own nation. So he has to take them out. But the question is, right? The Or Chaim HaKadosh says, even though God put them there, even though he prevented them, from stopping it, they're surrounded by this. They're surrounded by this immoral society, tremendously immoral society. So you could ask, God, what do you expect? What do you expect? You're sticking them into an immoral society. How do you expect them to survive? They don't have Torah yet. How do you expect them to survive? Even with Torah. Yeah. Says Or Chaim HaKadosh. He says they were stuck there. They had no choice. They're forced against their will, but they're still going to be punished, right? Even though they're forced against their will, doesn't matter. They have an obligation to fight against it. Okay. They can't claim you did this to us. It's not fair. They didn't say that because that argument they're not going to win. It was forced against them, period. Okay, so God understood he had to take them out early. Okay. Says Or Chaim HaKadosh over here, even so, I did that. God says, and I put you in this place, in this totally immoral place. What did I command you? I commanded you that what? I commanded you that you shouldn't go in their ways. That's what it says in the next verse. Right? Like the actions of the Egyptians that you dwelt there. We'll go through that verse. Do not do what they do. I.e., don't be immoral and go in their ways. Very good. But what are the odds someone's going to stay? Someone is going to stay, pure, so to speak, if they're living in Sin City. That seems to be an impossibility. Right? Nonetheless, says Or Chaim HaKadosh over here, you're right. God puts them in a totally immoral place. For whatever reason. Doesn't he know they're gonna succumb to temptation and all that? Sure. So he puts them there. Even so, God says, I don't want you to do it. I do not want you to go in those ways. So again, it's like a circular argument. You don't want them to go in their ways, but you put them right in the middle of it. If you're going to tell me they're going to live in a cave somewhere, not have any, connection to anybody in the world, They're going to rise and raise themselves to high spiritual levels. Very good. Very good, but they're living in a cave. Okay. You put them in the middle of Sin City, what do you expect? So the Dubna Maggid was a good friend of the Vilna Gaon. Dubna Maggid used to go, around different communities giving Musar. Very good at giving Musar. So the Vilna Gaon called him in one day and he said, I want you to give me Musar. It's like, how can I give you, the Vilna Gaon? How can I give you Musar? He says, I want you to give me Musar. Don't hold anything back. So what was one of the things he told him? He says, you know the Gemara backwards. You know everything, this, that. You're on a very, very high spiritual level, but you're sitting in your house. You're living in a cave. You're not out there with other people, with the rest of the nation. Of course you can be so great sitting in your own house. That's one aspect of Musar he gave. The Gaon had an answer. He had an answer one. That he didn't need to be around everybody else. But the point is, if you live in your own enclave, right? You live in your own cave, so to speak. That's bad. 100% that's bad. Not only that, the Rambam says the laws of repentance. The Rambam says clear, it's one of the 24 things that stops the person from proper repentance. That is, you separate from the community. You can't be part of the community. You can't live in your own island. Now, it doesn't mean you can't live in a Jewish community or an Orthodox community. You have to, right? That you have to. You can't live on your own, right? You can't live in your own place, right? On your own island, so to speak. But this is a very tough question here. In other words, God knows past, present, future. He knows past, present, future. If he knows past, present, future, he knows what's going to happen to Jewish people. He knows he's going to have to take them out early. True. So obviously he had to put them in there for a reason. But he says, even with that, says Or Chaim HaKadosh, take some questions. The Or Chaim HaKadosh here says, even though they were forced it, even though it's against their will, even though they're under onus, it's against their will, totally against their will, they're not in control. The fact that they're not in control, guess what? Doesn't matter. The fact that they are not in control, right, means that they have no choice. If they have no choice, you'll say, well, how can they get punished? Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they don't have choice right now, right? They're forced into that situation. Very good. Even if they're forced in that situation, they have an obligation not to give in. Okay. But they weren't given Torah yet. Okay, very good. Good question. They're not given Torah. Okay. How are they going to fight against it? That'll be very hard. But says the Or Chaim HaKadosh over here, even if that's the case, God still says you got an obligation not to go in the way of the Egyptians. Yeah, let me take some questions here. Somebody mentions what I said, right? What distinguishes men from animals' ability to fight the inclination, right? That's true. But I'm saying, even so, if you're forced, if you're living in a place that's totally immoral, get immorality all around you. Now, again, is that a guarantee you'll be immoral? No, not a guarantee, right? At the same time, you can say, well, what do you want from me? You put me in this situation. Okay. But God says, I don't expect you to be like bottom of the barrel. Non-Jews also have obligations. As Rambam says, like, who non-Jews are allowed to be with, sexually and who not. Okay. But there's a basic law of morality, a minimal level of morality that even non-Jews should, partake in or not partake in, let's say. Now, you say it's not that penalty if they do it. Okay. Right? But again, someone there points out, and my words echoing here, right? And that is, you still have free choice. You have the ability to go against it. How many people today? I didn't take a survey, right? I didn't take a survey, but how many people today, across the board, men and women, let's say they're straight, we'll make it easy. Yeah, heterosexual people. How many people got married and they still were a virgin? Again, we're gonna, we'll keep this clean. Now, some people will say, I did. Other people say they did. Okay. Is that the minority today? Probably. People, definitely promiscuous at very young ages. Yeah. But there were different levels, right? People will say that, that's like being square. What? Who says we're living in Victorian England? No offense, anyone who's living in Victorian England. Of course. People sexually active, let's say not such a young age. Let's say they're in their 20s already. One thing leads to another. You can watch the movie When Harry Met Sally, movie in the 80s. Basically can never be friends with a person of the opposite sex because it just never goes that way. It goes further normally. Okay. But seriously, how many people in the world, got married and they were still a virgin? Yeah. We'll look it up one day, see if they have any stats on it. Yeah, but in today's day, I find it very hard to believe. Very, very hard to believe that's going to be a high number. I'll take it even further. Even if it's a higher number than I think. Doesn't really matter. I'll take it further. How many people have not had contact with a person of the opposite sex? Physical contact. We know what we're talking about here. Yeah? Keep this clean. Before they're married. That's like zero. In secular world, zero. I'm not talking, whatever, crazy relationship. Transgender and that. I'm not even talking about that. Normal. The person never never kissed the person of the opposite sex, intimately, like when they were younger, before they got married. And the answer is going to be zero. Should be zero. Find it very hard to believe. Yeah, maybe in some communities, maybe. Yeah, but most people in the secular world, that'd be unheard of. Unheard of. Religious world, I understand, but the secular world. So okay. So you're gonna say there are levels. There are multiple levels here. Okay. So when does society get out of control? You'll say a person over the age of 18, yeah, two consenting adults. What's the problem? Forget about religious aspect. What's the problem? Two consenting adults. I'm not talking crazy situations like 50-year gap in between, one and the other. I'm not talking about that. Normal relationship. Yeah. Unheard of. Nobody? I mean, come on. Everyone say it's normal. Totally normal. I'm not talking about spilling seed. That's a different issue. I'm just talking about someone being with another person and having physical contact. Doesn't mean they go all the way. I'm not going, whatever. Right? Again, I'll keep this clean. But in general, it's about unheard of. Unheard of today. I'm not saying by certain people it doesn't exist. Yeah. Probably some out there, that, have old school values. Could be. Could very well be. They're in the minority. I don't even think it's close. Right? I don't even think it's close. But, you're surrounded by this society. You see it in movies, you see it in billboards, you see it all over. Because this is what sells. Right? This is what sells. So therefore you see it. So what's the problem? Two consenting adults. Yeah, I'm not talking like where they're 16 and 14, or I'm not, I'm not going that far. I'm saying they're older. Or 20s. Yeah. Older, two consenting adults. Why not? There was someone when I was in college, someone older. They were in what are they were getting a master's? or something. Whatever, second degree. So it's probably in their early 20s. And the person come on, I thought I was marrying this person. I thought this is the person I was going to marry. Yeah. I can tell you, she wasn't a virgin. She said it herself. This is the person I thought I was going to marry. Okay. But I'm saying that's not even, that's even another level higher. Because they're not looking, to fool around or whatever. They're looking to find, a spouse. Okay. One way to do it. But a lot of other people out there aren't going to be the case. Certainly not going to be the case. I went to university. I know what it's like there. Victor Miller once said, you learn a lot of interesting things in university, like narcotics. It's booze and women. Yeah, and what did he call he's talking about this more than 50 years ago, 60 years ago. I'm talking about what was going on today or even when I was there. Yeah, but he said, what's a dormitory? Well, girl, men and women, lives, same floor, separate floor, whatever it is. It's called a brothel. That's what he called it. Yeah, I'm just quoting his words. Yeah, you're gonna say, oh, that's disgusting. This is what goes on, right? This is the real world, quote unquote. I don't think it's got any better, since I was there. It's getting worse in other ways, but morally, definitely getting worse. I don't think there's any question. Yeah, definitely, well, again, 18, 19, 20-year-old, like, what's on their mind? You'll say, well, aren't they there to get a degree? Sure. So they to learn a little bit, take exams, they have to get a degree. Everyone say you have to get a degree. Okay. But what are they interested in? You get nerds really interested in learning this and that. People go to parties, people get drunk, people do drugs, other things. They're there to have fun. 100%. They're there to have fun. Go to bars, go to other places, this, that. So what do you think is going to happen? What in the world do you think is going to happen? So you're living in that type of society. That type of society. Yeah, that's what it is. So I heard a great rabbi say that in the modern Orthodox world, this is a very scary statistic. In the modern Orthodox world, so they'll send their kids to university, even the best universities. Yeah, quote unquote. Ivy League schools, whatever, Penn, Princeton, Dartmouth, Columbia, whatever, all these places. Yeah. And they grew up, 12 years of schooling. They keep Torah mitzvahs, whatever level. They keep Torah mitzvahs, keep Shabbos, keep the festivals. So this great rabbi said, when they get to one of these universities, I'm not talking about, Yeshiva University. I'm not talking about the, religious university, quote unquote. Yeah. They get to a secular university. He said 1 semester. All it takes is 1 semester, and they're not already keeping Shabbos. Now, why is that? What happened to all their learning? Quote unquote. So you say they're more modern. This okay. 1 semester? A little bit much, even fanatical, a little bit for me. Yeah. But how does that happen? Because when are all the parties? On Shabbos. When are all the other, events, sporting events, other things on Shabbos? It's a very big test. I'm not here to judge them. Yeah, I got what to say, but I'm not here to judge them. They're in a very, very hard test. I would say impossible test. Because even if they're keeping Shabbos, even if they're strong, and they're gonna, whatever, maybe they're gonna go to the Hill House or go to Chabad, whatever it is, let's say, what are all the friends doing? What about the people they meet? Everything's done on Shabbos. My mom went to university. So she went to school with a bunch of, let's say, modern Orthodox kids, so to speak, or somewhere anywhere between conservadox, to say they're whatever they were. They weren't, we'll say they weren't so religious. There was no contradiction. There was no contradiction going to the Chabad house Friday night and going out to party afterwards. No contradiction whatsoever. Getting drunk, doing other, whatever it is. No contradiction. So if you're in that type of environment, what are the odds a person's going to survive? One semester. All it takes is one semester. What happened to all the mussar you heard? What about, importance of keeping Shabbos? What about learning? Other things. 12 years of schooling. Should have got some knowledge. Some Torah knowledge you should have, for sure. Gone in one semester. This is what we're talking about. Do not go in their ways. Right? We're going to speak more, when we get to that verse. So, got a ways to go through this Orach Chaim HaKadosh. But he says, God put them there, and he wants them not to go in their ways. So it's kind of like you're dangling this carrot with the strongest urge given to man, right? Sexual urge, the strongest urge given to man. And you're saying, I'm putting you in that environment to survive. You have to survive in that environment and not go in those ways. So now what's the answer? You'll say, we said before, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh here said that a person can uphold it, can withstand it. Yeah, you can stand up to it. You're not going that way. Very good. Got to be a saint. Got to be a choir boy over here. Yeah, or just dead physically. Either way, right? Something else is going on. How's the person going to survive that? God says it doesn't matter. I put you there for a reason. You're obligated to listen to me, to do what I say. Don't go in their way. And the ways of God are pleasant, he says. Right? Not the only one says it. Plenty of others say it also. So the ways of Torah are pleasant. It's going to be very hard. This is going to seem almost impossible. You're going in to the worst place in the world. I'll make it a little more graphic. Right? Again, keep this PG. YouTube won't care. Yeah, I'll make it a little more graphic. Cleopatra. Day of Mark Antony. Right? You remember Mark Antony? Mark Antony, Cleopatra. How did Cleopatra die? You know how Cleopatra died? They dropped a horse on her. Right? We're going to get to that verse. We're going to get to that verse about bestiality. I don't know when. We'll get there. Right? Forbidden. Bring an animal upon a person. A woman, a guy, doesn't matter. She died wanting, I guess, to have relations with a horse. Yeah, that's great. But what happened? They dropped her on it. They dropped the horse on her. Terrible way to go, I guess. Get crushed. Horse is a big animal. Now how high they dropped it on her, but you drop a horse, 100 feet. I mean, hopefully the horse doesn't die either. Yeah. Or even less. They want to place the horse on top of her. Very good. She got squashed. Yeah. What a way to go. That's how she died. Yeah. Now, it's not unheard of what went on in that society. Right? Egypt any better? Stay away from that as well. Yeah. But that wasn't like, again, we're not living in Victorian England. This is what went on. So, Judaism says, yeah, it's forbidden. Stay away from all these things. But you're surrounded by it. 100% you're surrounded by it. So you say, well, it's an impossibility. I don't know. God doesn't say it's an impossibility. He doesn't say that. He says, I put you there for whatever reason. Very good. Right? I put you there. Right? I put you there. And I put you there to listen to what I say. That's why I put you there. But then he knew what was going to happen? Of course. 100% he knew what was going to happen. Nonetheless, as the Orach Chaim HaKadosh here says, they're commanded to keep what he says. Stay away from this. But I'm surrounded by it. What do you want? Someone here mentions, but we can train an animal, to do things out of you can train them, some things. Okay. Yeah. Other than compassion, naturally predatory animals. Yeah. But what is that? That's not free will. You can train, the famous example of training a cat. They train a cat to walk on its hind legs, be able to walk around, serve people, this and that. But a cat's a cat. I didn't know a cat's a cat, so they did an experiment. While it's doing all these things being trained, after a while, they took a mouse, put it on the floor. What the cat do? Ran after the mouse. Because that's what cats do. They run after mice. No matter how much you train it. Even though you're right, Alvin, to, have compassion, for their young. And so to other animals, that's true. And some may even sacrifice themselves to save their young. Okay. That's not free will. Do not make that mistake. It's not free will. Right? How did they gain that ability? Very simple. They gain that ability because God put it in their DNA. It's in their DNA. That's their instinct. Instinct tells them to do that. There was an earthquake. Was it an earthquake? It was an earthquake. Yeah, there was an earthquake somewhere. I forget where. And the female elephant or the male elephant, whatever it was, surrounded the child. Surrounded the child elephant. If anything happened, they get the brunt of whatever it was. Now, why'd they do that? So you can say they're compassionate, right? But where they learn how to do that? There's only one way they learned how to do it. They don't think like we do. They don't make decisions like we do. It's good to do it. It's not good to do it. Why do they do certain things? Because it's instinct. Instinct means they have the nefesh behemoth, which everybody has, the animalistic soul. Yeah, by them, that's all they have. So they don't make other decisions. They don't make any decision. How they hunt. Yeah, if you have predators, leopards, tigers, this, that. How do they hunt? It's instinct. They sneak up on their prey. They or they just jump out at them and they run after them and different things. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes not. Whatever it is. How they learn how to do that? How does any animal learn how to hunt for food? So you say at the beginning, what's the parent going to do? Feed it. Very good. You take you take hawks, let's say. Yeah, so they take out fish, they take out other things, rip it to shreds and feed it to their, to their young until they're strong enough to do it themselves. But where do they learn how to do that? Once they learn how to fly, it's instinct. That's the only thing it is. That's all they have. It's instinct. Instinct is telling them what to do. And not only that, it's telling them how to hide from other predators. Yeah. How do animals survive or not survive? It's instinct. They sense, animals coming to attack them, whatever. They have, ways to try and defend themselves or escape or, whatever. Famous videos people see, let's say lions chasing after deer or whatever. The lion, comes in, maybe sneaks upon the deer. What's the deer? First thing the deer does, runs. Or like, hawks and rabbits, whatever. What does the rabbit do? Runs. Right? Tries to get away as much as possible. How does the rabbit know how to do that? Because they know they're in trouble. How do they know they're in trouble? They're being chased. Yeah? They know they're going to be, dog meat soon or rabbit meat or whatever. Right? But that's all instinct. They don't have the ability that we do to make decisions. They don't have that ability. That's all instinct. So you're right. How did they gain that ability? They gained it because God gave it to them. That's part of their DNA. He gave them the ability to survive. Now, some will survive better, some not. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. Right? They have a purpose. They for sure have a purpose. Yeah. It's either kill or be killed. That's it. So if God doesn't need, their species anymore, so they'll become extinct. But it's only nature. It's only their inherent nature. So we also have an inherent nature, yeah, but we can make decisions. Right? As somewhere pointed out, we mentioned before, by Rav Eli Lopian. Rav Eli Lopian said that how are we different than animals? We have the ability to go against our desires. That is the answer. Animals don't have that. They are programmed. They can decide, I want to eat, I don't want to eat. I don't feel good, I don't want to eat. Okay. But that's instinct. That's all it is. It's It's how, it's how the program. It's how the program. So how'd they get that ability? Instinct, part of their soul, part of the animalistic soul. Or proof the Messiah is being here already. We don't have proof on that. I mean, we believe there's a Messiah in every generation. There's a spark of the Messiah in every generation. If there's a spark of the Messiah in every generation, doesn't mean the Messiah is going to reveal himself unless the generation is worthy. So that spark gets passed on. How it gets passed on is a good question, but that's Kabbalah 101. But it gets passed on. So there's one person generation that knows he's the Messiah, right? 100%, 100% he knows that he's the Messiah. Yeah. Now, if he dies, what does God do? God passes that on. Right? God passes that on to someone else. Right? He passes it on to someone else. So, do we know who the Messiah is today? No. We don't know. Is there proof? Yeah, there's proof we're living in the Messianic era. Right? That there's a lot of proof for. Okay. But not proof that, we have, that the Messiah is right here. We don't know who it is. Nobody knows who it is. Doesn't mean he's not here. Proof of the Messianic era, yes. So if we're living in the Messianic era, there has to be a Messiah in every generation. Now, there's only one person who knows, I think, who's the Messiah, and that's himself. But no one else knows. So is he here? He's in every generation. The only question is, does he have the ability to reveal himself? That's the only question. Right? And obviously, if he hasn't revealed himself, right? If he hasn't revealed himself, what does that mean? That means not here. That doesn't mean, it means the generation is not worthy. That's what it means. Right? In other words, if the Messiah is already here, which you understand that's true, right? And every generation is like that, okay. So if the Messiah is here, anyone know who he is? The only person who knows who he is him. It's the Messiah himself. No one else knows. Right? Now, is he going to reveal himself? Let's see. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. Maybe it's wait till the next generation. Yeah, it could be. Doesn't mean he doesn't exist. We just don't know who it is. Right? But there is no question across the board, no one disagrees, that we're living in the Messianic era. Messianic era can last a long time, though. It can last another 200 years. I find it hard to imagine. Right? But it has to be, the Messiah has to come within the year 6,000, which is another 200 some odd years. Right? So, it'll come. The Messiah will come whenever we deserve it to come. Could be tomorrow, could be the next day, could be in 5 years, could be 10 years, could be 50 years. Nobody knows. Right? Now, what happens if that person dies? And he knows he's the Messiah. So God passed that spark to someone else. It means that generation wasn't worthy. So the Gemara says, if you don't build the temple in your own generation, it's like you destroyed it. Pretty harsh. Because we're a very weak generation. Cream puff generations, we always say. So if we're in a cream puff generation, a greater generation of Rashi, the Ramban, the Rambam, the Beis Yosef, the Tur, you had all these great people. They didn't merit to bring the Messiah. How are we going to bring merit? Right? So what's the simple answer? The simple answer is we have the ability because we're jumping on the backs of much greater people. Since we're jumping on the backs of much greater people, we don't have to do that much. I mean, we still have to do something, obviously, to bring the Messiah to come. Very good. But we don't, it's a lot easier for us. A lot of the hardship and difficulty that they went through, they made a lot easier. A lot easier, for us to be able to bring the Messiah. Yeah, but still, plenty of things we have to do. Right? Definitely plenty of things we have to do. Somebody asks, what do we do on Lag BaOmer? Well, what do most people do? I mean, outside states have to have agreement of the fire department so you don't burn the place down. If you make a bonfire, what's fire compared to light? What's light compared to Torah? Well, why do we make a bonfire? Because the power of the light that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai brought the Zohar into the world. Right? The day he died. The day he died, and the day he died, he gave over to his students the he gave over to his students Kabbalah. So there's a custom. There's a custom that people make bonfires, and they sing the song Bar Yochai. It's in every prayer book. I think it's in every prayer book. And that's it. I mean, there are people that go to Meron, go to Mount Meron, like tens of thousands. There's a tragedy, a few years ago. But like an unbelievable amount of people go there. People come, from outside of Israel, to go to be by the grave of Shimon Bar Yochai. And from what I've heard, I've never been there on that day, but from what I've heard, I see so many people, tens of thousands of people, stay up all night, they sing and they dance and hear words of Torah and this and that. I've heard it's like an unbelievable spiritual experience. I've never done it. I've never been, never been part of it, but it is pretty miraculous over the years. I mean, you have a huge amount of people go up. You had God forbid there was a tragedy a few years ago where a lot of people, died. And, again, very hard to explain. Therefore, whatever, it doesn't matter. But a lot of people up there, tens of thousands of people. Could have almost 500,000 people up there. I mean, it's anyone's ever been, to Meron, to that, to that, that kever, to that grave. It's not a lot of room there. Not a ton of room there. So it's like, like you're packed in like sardines, over there, and you have, different Rebbe's lighting and whatever. A lot of it, again, a lot of it really has to do with Kabbalah. So what do people do? What do some people do? So in order to commemorate the Yortzeit, first of all, today that all the students of Rebbe Kiva died. But what do some people do? They learn certain things. They learn Kabbalah, let's say, some people, and learn something from Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai. Things that he said. For the let's say the Lithuanian community, I don't even people even go to bonfires. Some do. Some will take their kids, whatever, and go. Other people, it's kind of funny. Some people, make a barbecue, like whatever. Nothing to do with Shimon Bar Yochai or anything like that, but like it's part of the atmosphere, I guess. So like here in Israel, they always say like close all the windows because it smells like one huge barbecue, right? Because every neighborhood is gonna have bonfires like no tomorrow. This year I'm not sure because expecting it to be I think they're expecting it to be windy, so I'm gonna be leery of having any bonfires because the fires that were here last week or a week and a half ago. But in the outdoor Orthodox community, yeah. So what do people do? They light bonfires. Maybe roast marshmallows, afterwards, or whatever. That's it. Some will learn things that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said. They'll learn Kabbalah for that. Okay. But I remember, in the States, anybody wanted to make their own fire, you had to like coordinate with the fire department, right? Here, since after Passover, you got kids like finding all kinds of stuff to light this, like these big bonfires. I mean, like, they get all these old boards and all kinds of things. People throw out, they use as like, to light it up. And it's like, it's pyromaniac's dream, so to speak. So you get little kids. It's funny, I saw it the other day. I see like these little kids like taking these like, beams that are like 10 times their size and like they're schlepping them to place them somewhere, so they can, get all this wood for the sake of this bonfire, whatever. It's I guess maybe Hasidim more into it, but here a lot of people go up to Meron. Now this year it's gonna be interesting because it's Thursday night, right? Thursday night, Friday. So like you still got to prepare for Shabbos. It could be maybe some people stay up there for Shabbos. People like rent out places there. I don't know. I've heard people say who've been there. It's like it's a wild, unbelievable, spiritual experience. Okay, I'm still not ready for it. So I still haven't done it. But in every other community, that's what they do. They have a lot of bonfires. They'll sing the song Bar Yochai, maybe a few other songs. That's it. Like, I know some people like they might go outside, look at it, and that's it. Like, doesn't have, it's a big thing. Shimon Bar Yochai brought the Zohar to the world. as we believe, brought Kabbalah to the world. Okay. Yeah. Here's what I'm not poo-pooing it. I'm not saying it's a small thing. It's not a small thing, but I don't know, going up to his grave with tens of thousands of people, other things going on there. I don't know. Most people don't do it. There are people that do. Plenty of people do. The people wait all year for this. And they go up there and they say it's like such an unbelievable experience. People fly in, to go there. Okay. I'm not a big grave person per se, but even though it's an auspicious day, it's true. So it's definitely an auspicious day, but yeah, it is about bonfires and whatever, but like there's a lot deeper meaning, there also. But I think for most people, and probably most people probably miss the point, I would think. But person wants to go to a bonfire, sing Bar Yochai, okay, roast a few marshmallows. That's what people do. And I'm sure, and that's what most people do. Somebody here mentioned 1 second. Somebody here says we're not having a good Jewish community, but you're having to work in a secular society. Okay, that's people have that. People have that. How do you cope with it? It's a problem. It's a big problem. There are a lot of pitfalls. A lot of pitfalls, especially you got to work with people of the opposite sex. Yeah, it's not an easy thing. That a lot of people are in that same situation. Let's say they live in a strong community, they live in a good Orthodox Jewish community, but they work in a secular environment. So the answer is it's always better if you can find work like this. It's obviously better to work in a place where there are religious people there. There are no non-Jews and secular Jews there. Right? Now, that's the ideal. Does it always work out? It doesn't necessarily always, always work out. It's better, 100%. 100% is better. But yeah, there's a conflict, a major, major conflict. Way people dress, how they talk. I get these questions all the time. What people say, how they dress, making blessings, having to skirt certain issues, meaning get around certain things like, same-sex marriage, and someone expecting you to say mazel tov, you can't. Like certain things you can't, certain things you can't do. People have to be okay with that. And sometimes, I've heard people say, well, you can't say anything against. Say anything against, you get fired. Okay. So going to one of these things, that's a different issue. So someone will say, what if it's the boss? The boss says, I'm getting married, you have to come. I don't see how you can go. Might have to lose your job in such a case. Right? But I think that's a little bit extreme. But someone wants to ask me, what if everyone's chipping in for a gift? Can you chip in for a gift? No. You can't chip in for a gift. No possible way. It's forbidden. These are challenges. They're not small challenges here. Society is totally messed up. Right? Then what happens, let's say, even the best of situations. Even in the best of situations, you have to work with someone of the opposite sex, let's say, or anyone's sex, you're on a project. See, working with someone of the opposite sex is more problematic because you have to have more boundaries. Right? Definitely more boundaries. And even in the best of marriages, a person can fall. Definitely a person can fall. So I know people that will never call someone of the opposite sex by the first name. They'll say Mr. So-and-so or Rabbi so-and-so. They'll never call them by the first name. Why not? Put up extra boundaries. Right? They will put up extra boundaries, make sure that doesn't happen. But is it, it's a hard balance. 100% a hard balance. That's why, again, any of these things, any of these challenges, a person always has to be steeped in Torah. If you're not steeped in Torah, it's very easy. It's very easy to fall. You hear someone curse, you hear someone say other things. It's not just the person picks up on it, they hear it, they see it. It has an effect. It has an effect, right? Someone said, heard people speaking Lashon Hara or cursing or this and that. So what did I do to deserve that? So if we were on the level of Rabbi Akiva Eger, he was at a wedding. And he heard, somebody speak, whatever, jokingly, whatever about something. And he ran out of the home, went into a side room and berated himself. What did he do to be subjected to this? Why did he have to hear this? In other words, he took upon himself that he must have done something to hear this. Right? I don't think people want to hear this, but he said basically, I must have sinned, otherwise God wouldn't have put this in my way. So I always say, I always say it's mostly a test. You're going to be sensitive to these things, not sensitive to these things. But the real thing is that even if you're in that situation, then it's your own fault. Potentially, it's your own fault. No one wants to hear that. But, as Rabbi Akiva Eger said, not just a test. I must have done something to cause it. So for us, not on that level per se, we have to say that's part of the test. Are you sensitive enough to the way people speak or the way they dress or other things? God's going to make you more sensitive, right? And you should be more sensitive. But you say, I'm affected by it. Okay, you got to learn more Musar. You got to learn more Torah when you can, right? It's an evil inclination for sure, right? So what's the best thing, right? So what's the best thing? So the best thing is, the best thing is that you have to realize it's a test. And even if you fall, whatever, realize, what am I going to do to overcome this? Right? But again, in any of these cases, you have to set up boundaries. You have to set up serious boundaries. If you don't set up serious boundaries, you fall. Question is how far. But that's why you have to speak to people. Just make it minimal talk. Shouldn't be, it just shouldn't be more than that. Because you don't want to have a connection to these people. You can't just never speak to them. You can't be rude, but at the same time, you don't want to be too friendly either. Now, what happens if you have to work on a project with people? Okay, so you got to do what you need to do. Yeah, but you got to keep everything at bay. It's not easy. 100%, it's not easy. So it's a big test. There are a lot of tests in the workplace. No question. Someone here says 50 partners before marriage. Yeah. People say they have 20. People say they have 30. I don't know. Whatever. Someone told me many years ago, how could you not be intimate with someone before you get married? I'm like, what, are you going to try them out first? I mean, I think you probably get the hang of it eventually, right? Again, keep this clean. Yeah, what is there to know? Per se. They're going to squeeze the bottom of the toothpaste. What, you're going to say, but it's a crazy thing. They look at you like you're a wacko. What are you saving yourself for? Yeah. I mean, Kabbalistically, there's whatever. There's what to be said. There's what to be said. A person's intimate with the wrong person and cause problems. It can cause serious spiritual problems. But without Kabbalah, people think this is normal. Be with as many people as you can be with. I mean, if you're a woman, I don't think that's so good. If you're a guy, okay. So you wild oats, so to speak. Okay. Be as promiscuous as you want. It's a guy talking. For a woman, I don't know if it's so great, but they get sucked into society also. They also want to have fun. Why not? Why not? But yeah, it's crazy. Okay. 50 could be a lot. Let's say it was 10. Let's say it was 5. Still, I would say it's too many. Even though a non-Jew doesn't have that obligation, they certainly don't have that obligation. But isn't there? You would think there's a basic level of decency. So say 2 consenting adults, like we said before. What's the problem? They both agree. It's not a problem. No one's being forced. Beautiful relationship. Maybe it'll lead to marriage. Maybe it won't. Yeah. Or maybe right? I will get gross there. Maybe they're both using each other because they just want to have fun. That can also happen. They're looking like, oh, this person I'm going to marry and whatever. Marriage. Not interested in marriage. Yeah, they want to have fun. Yeah. And when a lot of times things happen when they drink, because now they have fewer inhibitions. Yeah, they might not agree to go as far, if they weren't drunk. Okay, but people know you want to advance in a relationship. That's what you have to do. A lot of people will say, but then people get objectified. Women get objectified. So it's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. But people say, like, come on. Experience this, experience that, experience the other thing. People look at you like you're square. Someone's going to hold out for their husband. They're going to get married. Come on. They're going to wait. People aren't going to wait. People are not going to wait. Even if they don't think this person's going to marry. So what? They want to have fun. Whatever. Want to have that experience. When you're younger, it's a different thing. It's a different thing. Some people say, I don't really like this person, but I'm hanging out with them, for experience. Like, kind of crazy. Especially if it's a woman. Yeah. Okay, but caused a lot of problems. In the movie When Harry Met Sally, that's exactly the point. Not that, going to be a proof for a movie, but that's exactly the point. Because physicality always gets in the way. And what happens when you can't be physical? Then what type of relationship do you have? Relationships is a disaster. Because you're only looking for physicality. What happens? What happens? You get older, person has a kid or two, not the same body weight. You don't look the same. You look elsewhere. But that's infatuation. It's not love. Love is very different. Love, you got to work at. That's why you have two things here. Can have intimacy when it's permissible. Very good. And when it's not permissible, what do? She gets a period. What do? You got to separate. Okay. So what do? You got to look at the person as an individual. It can't be physical. You got to deal with it other way. You can't say, I'll speak to you in 2 weeks. Not going to make the woman feel so good. Yeah. So it's a relationship based on other things. It's a deeper relationship. Should be. A deeper relationship. But physicality always gets in the way. Always. Yeah. No exceptions. No exception. No matter how it's used, it gets in the way. In the Orthodox world, you don't have any contact till after marriage. Right? There's good reason. There's very good reasons why, the way the marriage is set up, you see 90-95% of the time it works. That, again, people get divorced. It's on the books. You get divorced. Divorce rate is high, it's too high as it is, but not even close to the secular amount. Secular amount is like 50-60% easily. The institution of marriage is a disaster. Better live together. Like Victor Miller would say, people who live together, they end up, if they get married, 75% chance they're going to get divorced. What happened? Like, you're milking the cow for free, no pun intended. So, like, all of a sudden you got a piece of paper, it's not as enjoyable. Right? So what happened? So Victor Miller said, how do you end a great romance? Get married. That's different. Now it's like already, you cut to the chase, you got the chase, very good. Now what? Now you got to live together. Not so easy. People come from different backgrounds, different ways of life, this, that. You got to work. Marriage is something works. It's not all fun and games. Definitely not all fun and games. But again, if a person's married because they're infatuated, they're with somebody because they're infatuated, that's what it is. It doesn't stick. It will not stick. Right? Further, again, the Gemara says you have to be attracted to the other person. You can't marry someone if you're not attracted to them. Yeah. You can will it as much as you want. If you're not attracted, you're not attracted. Yeah. But nonetheless, it's something that's got to be worked on. You take a flower. If you don't water it, you don't give it sunlight, it'll die. Right? A marriage the same way. You can be married for so many years, you don't work at it. Okay. So what happens? Marriage can atrophy. You got to work at it. in the best of marriage, right? And there's a lot of pressure, other things that go on, very good, right? You have trauma also. I mean, a lot of things. Problem with kids, whatever. But like, this idea to be with as many, many people, of the opposite sex before you get married, like it's just ludicrous. Ludicrous. But if you want to have fun and this and that, okay, don't. They'll say, I'll do whatever I want with my body, I'm consenting. Again, we're not talking about if they're young. If they're a consenting adult, that's their choice. 100%, that's their choice. So what's the problem? But again, isn't there a basic level for non-Jews? You would think there should be a basic level. Premarital sex should be forbidden for non-Jews, but it's not. I would say it's a moral imperative. It's not a forbidden relationship if you do that. But, is it good? Is it good for them? It's like, oh yeah, so much fun, so enjoyable. But is it good for them? And that always gets in the way. Right? Again, you need to be attracted to someone, but there has to be something more. There has to be something deeper. Because attraction fades. Bodies change over time. They change. So what are you going to do? A few years later, they put on a few extra pounds. That's why you're attracted to them. You're going to tell your spouse or, girlfriend, like you're going to go on a diet. That's like kiss of death, right? All you men out there, you never say that. Lie, but you don't say that. You destroy a woman. What? I'm not attractive. You're going to say you're fat? Like I wouldn't do that. And if your wife, hits you with the frying pan, then okay, you deserved it, right? There's certain things you don't say to a woman, right? Usually one of them is ask their age. That's one thing. Someone got slapped for that on a plane. I don't know why exactly, but woman got offended, asked how old she was. I don't know if they thought he was trying to hit on her or not. I don't know. You never say anything about a woman's weight. Try and encourage this, that, but like you come out and say like she's fat, that's like kiss of death. Absolute kiss of death. So whatever, it's something needs to be worked on. But yeah, what goes on in secular society is crazy. We that far from Sodom and what happened in Egypt. I mean, it's crazy. People change partners like you change a shirt. Hook up with people, this and that. When they're younger, it's worse. So what do you expect? It's the biggest urge God gave us. You put people together, young people together, a different environment. Of course, what's going to happen? Here in Israel, you got the army, you got men and women together, secular army. Yeah. 18 years old, 18, 19, whatever, 20 years old. A woman is granted in this country 3 free abortions if she's in the army. It's on the books. So I was arguing with somebody about doing the army or I shouldn't do the army, this and that. Finally, back and forth, I said, there are separate units today. They're the ultra Orthodox Jews in the army, they have separate units. Okay. But you're in with the regular army, they want you to be like them. But I finally, back and forth, this guy's trying to give me all his arguments, giving in arguments, back and forth. Finally, I said, listen, on the books, and everybody knows this. Everybody knows this. On the books, a woman has the ability to get 3 free abortions if she's in the army. So what do you think is going on in the army besides defending the land? You put them together, they're 18 years old, 18, 19 years old. Hormones going crazy. I get it. That's on the books. That was it. Checkmate. That was the end of the conversation. And someone asked me this question, also asked me a whole bunch of other questions. This whatever, secular Israeli that lives in the States, saying about, not doing the armies. Anyway, back and forth. I use this argument also. They don't like that. Let's just say that didn't go over so well. I was like, we're not going there. I go look it up. Go look it up. Why do you think it's on the record? That if a woman wants, she can get 3 free abortions while she's in the army. Right? So what's the argument? What's the argument? It's like, women are there to fight just like men. You're right. Right? They want to fight. They don't have to. right? They can do other things and not do the army, right? Do it a different way. Okay. But they want to fight. They want to be with, they want to share the burden. They want to be with, they want to do the same thing. They want to be in the units. Okay. So what's going on there? You think there's like playing the guitar, singing Kumbaya? Yeah. Unbelievable immorality. Why do you think it's on the books? Like I said, they don't like that. Like, I don't care what, like I said, we're not going there. You're right. We're not going. Like I said, go check it out. Why do you think that's legal? That they have the ability to do that? I'm not saying it's the only thing to do it in the army. Don't get me wrong. They're here to defend the land. Very good. A lot of respect for that. But what do you think they're doing also? I mean, it makes sense. It's not like they're so sophisticated. They're young kids. So what do young kids do? Do all kinds of things. This is one of them. Someone says, okay, most would be 420. Okay. Late teens, yeah, sure. People are promiscuous, even whatever. Yeah, you're right. Early teens, not even late teens anymore. Right? People are, kids are promiscuous at a much younger age, much younger age. They're not prepared for any of this stuff. Whatever. Just want to have fun, this and that. I mean, stories that I heard. I won't look at 14, 15, 16. Talking about, sexual escapades. Again, you tell me they're over 18, they can make their own decisions. They're legal, okay. I think like in their 20s, okay, people make their own decision. If they're underage, find something else to do. Yeah, but again, it's fun. But it's a major distraction. Major distraction. Keep in mind, it has been proven also scholastically. Men and women are separate, they do better. If they're in the same school, men and women together, right? They're in the same classes, they don't do as well. That's been proven statistically, right? And in academic. It's good reason. It's a distraction, major distraction. But again, when I was growing up back in the day, this is nothing compared to what's going on today, what's out there. And nothing. Absolutely nothing. But again, what do people want? More than anything else, they want fun. Fun comes at a price, but okay. But again, people say that two consenting adults, what's the problem? They want to have fun. So let them have fun. What if the person and the partner before marriage didn't want to, but followed the advice of their parents? They have free choice. Who says you have to listen to your parents? We just read in last week's parsha by Parshas Kadosh, right? That it says you got to honor parents. It says you got to keep Shabbos. So juxtaposition of the verses. We'll get there one day. But what's the point? Rashi says that a parent tells you that's great Shabbos. Don't listen. Yeah. The parent can say, yeah. Parent will say it's healthy for them. Okay. Like, say it to a guy, maybe. Yeah, you want to say it to your daughter, it's healthy for you? I don't know about that. Maybe they'll say it today. I don't know. Everything goes. Right? But they say, okay. But you tell me, they follow the advice of the parents. It's good to have a girlfriend. They made a choice, though. They made their own choice. But you say, well, parental influence. Yeah. It can be good and can be bad. So the person has to be careful. Sometimes better not to listen to a parent. But some people don't want to go against what the parent does or what the parent says. They want to, have a relationship. They want to have a nice relationship with them. They don't want to buck the system, so to speak. Is there extra credit for trying to do the right thing? But what if if it's a forbidden relationship? Doesn't matter what the parents say. It's forbidden. Let's say it's not a forbidden relationship. Let's say it's as Kaufman would say, it's a moral imperative. Let's say at best it's a moral imperative. Yeah. So you listen to your parents. Okay. So you listen to your parents. You get extra credit. I don't know if you get extra credit for listening to them, but the question is, even if you listen to them, is this a good thing or not? Right? That's the question. Is this good or not? So we're going to say it's not good. It's definitely not good. It just promotes promiscuity. That's all it does. Right? Again, for a non-Jew, would it be forbidden? Technically, no. Death penalty? Certainly not. It's not a forbidden relationship. Right? But not all things parents are going to tell you to do is a good thing. So in this case, not forbidden. Right? Definitely not forbidden. For a Jew, it would be forbidden. Let's say for a non-Jew. For a non-Jew, it wouldn't be forbidden. Did you get the mitzvah of listening to your parents in such a case? Oh, that's a good question. Kibbut aim, kibbut off, listen to my father, listen to my mother. They encourage me. They get credit. I don't know. Why not? It's not forbidden. Definitely not forbidden. Is it good? Are they encouraging you to do something good? It's not forbidden, let's say. I'm not going to say it's great. Definitely not going to say that. But if it's considered not a bad thing, so then, yeah, they get some credit for it. What if someone is mentally hurt and looking to escape these relationships? That's hard. The problem with all this is what it leads to. And what it can lead to is tremendous heartache on both sides. Side of the guy, side of the woman. Let's say, the guy says this woman's not for me anymore. He breaks up with her and she goes to pieces. And she's like, dramatically hurt. Like unbelievably hurt. Okay. But she's not the right one for you. Yeah, let's try and let her down easy, whatever. Like, we're not going to get, she goes nuts and tries to kill him or whatever. But she's devastated. What about a guy? What about the guy gets let down? Is he going to be devastated? I mean, here cases, let's say someone leaves someone for like their best friend or a close friend or whatever. They're like devastated. You want to be with him? You don't want to be with me? Like, it's devastating. These relations hurt. They can be painful. They can be painful for sure. Yeah. So look at the problem is that what do people do? So it's a classic term. I don't know if it's still used today. A person says, I'm going to go somewhere and going to hook up with somebody. What does hook up mean? They want to meet someone. Doesn't mean they're going home to sleep with them, but they want to be with somebody. They want to hook up with someone. Why? They're lonely. They're bored. They want to escape. It's a normal thing. It's not, definitely a normal thing. It's a good escape in that sense. But what could a person do though? See, the problem is they're not in it for the right reason. They're there just to have fun and escape, but this person doesn't necessarily mean that much to them. In other words, they're not going to get emotionally involved. Works out, they have some fun, good. If not, okay. Right? The problem is a lot of emotion. A lot of emotion. You don't need. You don't need it on else. Yeah, that's why a person needs to wait till marriage. Like, that's it. Go through the ups and the downs and the highs and the lows and and all this, and you said something, you didn't mean it, she said something, whatever. It's very dramatic. Very, very dramatic. It can make a person depressed and whatever. Is a lot of it escapism? I don't know. I don't know if a lot of it necessarily escapism. I think most people in general, they want to have fun. Very simple. They want to find someone to have fun with. Now, is that going to mean this is my soulmate and whatever? I don't know. Depends what age, depends what they're looking for, in general. But a person's, let's say, in college, they're in university. Could be they're looking for a soulmate. Could be. Yeah, that's the best place to meet someone, normally. Because once you're out of college and you work, it's harder, but okay. I do know people that met in college. and ends up getting married, still married. So once you get out of that environment, it's not as easy to meet people. Okay. So yeah, so maybe you tell me, at that age already, maybe people have started to look. Okay. Younger than that, they're only doing it for fun. They may enjoy the company of the other person. They don't have intention of hurting the other person per se. Both want to have fun. Okay. They enjoy each other's company. Two consenting adults. What's the problem? What is the problem? Yeah, but again, the more you get attached, something happens, you're devastated. Like there are certain things like drama you don't need. You don't need. That's why in our circles, it's much easier, in certain ways, dating, because you're dating for marriage. Checking out the other side, they're checking you out, similar families, similar backgrounds, this, that, whatever it is. It's a lot easier in that sense. Yeah, there's rejections and other things. Okay, there are, definite hardships also, no question. But system works. It works in a major way. If I were a female today trying to meet somebody in the secular world, God should have mercy on all of them. How they gonna meet? What's gonna happen? Other things. It was like it's crazy. It's a crazy world. I would have said that 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And it's a guy. There's a guy talking. Yeah, say, okay, you're older, you know. You know what happens? Women want to have their own lives. They don't get married now. They're not interested. The guy's not gonna be interested in them. Why? They want to see the world, they want to make money, and then they'll get married. And they'll, maybe have a kid or two or whatever. But what happens when that, you don't meet the other person? Your biological clock is ticking, ticking, ticking. You saw the world, you went to all these places. Now you want to marry someone. You're fine. It's not gonna be so easy. I know someone like this got burned by the system. Probably a lot of people like that. They'll never have a natural child. I mean, they're married, but they'll never have a natural child. All they want is a natural child. They've given up on that hope now. But they got burned by the system. Could have met someone when they were much younger. But that wasn't there. That wasn't there. That was on their mind. What's on their mind is, get a degree, get a master's, get a PhD, whatever. Whatever you're gonna do with it, see the world. That's what they did. Well, they made so much money, but still, what they want to do, they want to see the world. They traveled all over. Very good. Never had their own child. For a woman in general, it's all a woman wants to have a natural child. At least one. At least one. Person will never have it. Sad, but I saw the world. I did this. I mean, they're okay with it now, but they were, very depressing. Especially, they see other people, have kids, maybe, big family, this and that, grandkids, and they're nothing. They got nothing. Yeah, it could be. If they would have known, they would have had a hard time having kids. When they were much younger, they would have looked for a spouse. They would have looked for a spouse more. They didn't. But this is what life threw at them. It's a big test. But the point is, they got burned by the system. Totally burnt by the system. Yeah. And that happens. So who said to give in to society, follow society's dictates? But I'm an individual, I can do what I want. You're right. You made the wrong choice. Or you looked for a spouse when it's too late. Or it's already too late to have kids. But you want to see the world. You want to do that. Okay, very good. But you paid a price. If you were to ask them, guaranteed, put all the money I don't have, guaranteed, if you were to ask them, if you could have found a spouse when you were much younger and tried to have kids, would you have done it? They said, what I know now, yes. And that would have meant you wouldn't have seen as many countries and this and that, yes. But they got burned. We're not as bitter about it as they were. But, tried fertility, this, that. It didn't work a few times and it's very expensive, so that's it. It's that. But you make the bed you lie in. They made a choice. It's sad. They got sucked in by society. So what do you do? They got sucked in by society. They got burned. That happens. Definitely happens. Is there a possibility that most of the women keep their babies, even get married from their partner in the army? No idea. No idea. If they would have the child, would they keep it? I don't know. They put up for adoption. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what those stats are. Yeah, a few other questions here. Let me see. God created everything measure for measure. Yeah. And the sins are punishable by death. Some are. I mean, not all sins are punishable by death, but okay. Are there 903 ways of death by the hand of heaven because there's no court in Sanhedrin today? Well, there are 36 being spiritually cut off. Right? Since there's no Sanhedrin, there was 4 corporal punishments. We don't have corporal punishment today. Right? Now, it doesn't mean corporal punishment doesn't exist. In other words, person desecrated Shabbos in public got warned. They would have been thrown off a 3-story building on their head. If that didn't kill them, a huge rock aimed for their heart. So what does that impact? Now, it could be, I'm not saying it is, but it could be person gets in a car crash. That's impact. Couldn't they die in such a way because they're liable for death penalty? Could be. Is it? I'm not, person dies in a fire, right? It's also corporal punishment. No one can pinpoint and say that's the reason. And no one ever would. Because then people would slaughter them, right? Because nobody knows. Yeah. So I don't think there are 903 ways of death by the hand of heaven. I mean, I don't have to check out exactly what that is. But in general, corporal punishment's only 4. Could be there are different things underneath that would apply today, even though we don't have corporal punishment. But there are many things that if you're not liable here, you're liable by the heavenly court. Well, yeah, there are a lot of things. 903, I don't know. I don't know what the number is. Someone says interesting. You were taught fetch supplies, right in the grocer opened. Okay. A few people are there. Those workers are preoccupied with their chores. Okay. Yeah, listen, if people are busy and nobody's schmoozing and you don't have that problem, that's better. For sure it's better. Because then you don't have any interaction. I'm talking about in a place where there's interaction, in an office and whatever it is. That there's gonna be, there's gonna have to be, interaction. There are people, working on their own, working, doing their own thing. Right? Doesn't mean there's no interaction at all, right? There's usually some level of interaction. When you have interaction, that's a problem. If people are too busy and they can't have interaction, okay, it's better. 100%. That's why, a person is going to figure out what profession that they want to be in. This is one of the factors they should think about. Especially, if they can work for a religious company or, this is one of the things. Like for a guy, trying to figure out what to do is not so easy, where you don't spend, all day doing the job and you could, can learn for a number of hours, then work, or something like that. But whatever, it doesn't always work out that way. But, depending on the profession. But yeah, the more that a person has less to do with people around them, obviously the better off. Obviously the better off because you run into all kinds of problems. All kinds of problems. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, so no other questions. I'm gonna sign out. I just every Sunday, 9 o'clock Eastern time, 4 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions? Find me on Facebook at Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos on Q&As, ethics for our fathers, book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com. Wish everyone a good beginning of the day, middle of the day, end of the day.